So a lot of them make sense, and you might predict which ones who's going to ask you for it. For instance, most cities, states, governments, they fall into this category of being predictable of asking for insurance requirements, including the SBA and the requirements they have for their EIDL loans that companies have taken out due to COVID or other disasters. Vendors and service providers follow suit. Right. And then lastly, as you might imagine, landlords often make the list most frequently asking for different insurance requirements in their contracts. Anytime real property is part of a professional relationship, then these requirements ensue. So probably the number one policy that's required is general liability. And what that does is it protects a third party in the event that there's bodily injury or property damage claimed to your products or services that you provide for them. And that would also include when you have somebody come into your office in a building that you might be renting a space or the whole building, and someone kind of trips and falls as they're coming in over your carpet. And so that would be the number one policy to make sure that you have your requirements buttoned up. The next thing would be property insurance. If someone is renting their property to you, they want to make sure that it's covered in case of a loss. If you're a restaurant, you could imagine you're in somebody else's building, you need to make sure not only that you have the safety elements in place, such as fire suppression, but also the insurance for the owner of the building should something happen. Professional errors and omission comes into play when there's failure in services or technology that you might be providing. The policy will provide the company with a way to make the client whole after an error that results from this mishap or financial loss occurs. And then there are other things such as directors and officers liability that might come into play. These typically are required by investors before they fund and before becoming a board member. And when you are working with investors and funding, there's a contract involved. So you'll probably see this there. So that's a general list of what you might see in a contract in terms of insurance requirements. Now, what do? Right? Here comes the risk management part. And a lot of times you will see that most contracts ask for reasonable requirements. And it only makes sense they should have these protections in place. But there are times, however, that you see outlandish requirements, and these need to come up as a big red flag for you. And that would be something such as an unusually high minimum occurrence or aggregate limits, policies that are unrelated to the scope of the contract. I would also look at broad language within the indemnity agreement. That works in their favor and not is in your favor. There is such a thing as being too broad. And the indemnity agreement language you would have reviewed by your attorney. If you're the party in the contract that the insurance requirements are being imposed upon, typically the contractor or subcontractor in construction, it's important to confirm the required coverage terms are either included in your current insurance program or can be purchased at a reasonable price. Now, that's a really big one. Ideally, you've had your broker review the contract before you sign it so that they can let you know what might be remiss in the requirements that are being put in front of you and what you might need to purchase. And is that purchase of new insurance more than what would be justified for this amount of a contract? For instance, if your contract is $25,000 and you're required to purchase additional insurance for $5,000, does that make sense? Is this something that you can write out of the contract, or do you need to rework your bid? Those are some areas that I would take a look at. Is what level of insurance on each of the different policies? Do the policies make sense regarding the contract or the scope of work? And any new requirements or endorsements that need to be added, are they reasonable and are they reasonably priced?